All right, so if you remember from our last discussion, we talked about theater before theaters, how drama was performed by these traveling acting companies, but these actors eventually did have to settle down because of the crackdown on vagrants and wandering beggars. So they were encouraged to find a rich sponsor and settle in the bustling town of London. So some of the first theaters to house these resident acting companies were old inns, but eventually theaters were built. The very first theater was built in 1576 and was creatively named The Theater, and was built and managed by a man named Richard Burbage. Richard Burbage's theater group was called the Chamberlain's Men, and Shakespeare was a shareholder in this group. So don't forget the business side of Shakespeare. So playwright, actor, and businessman. He wanted to make money. A dispute over the land on which the theater stood led to it secretly being torn down and the timbers carried away to build a new playhouse, the Globe Theater, in 1599. So literally, in the cloak of darkness, people came and took down the theater and carried those timbers across the Thames River to this new location, and the Globe Theater was built from the timbers of the theater, which is really kind of interesting. So here's a picture of the Globe Theater. So a couple of things to notice is that the theater is round, and I also want you to pay attention to the flag that is flying on top of the theater. So the Globe Theater was a public theater. It was not the only theater in London. Don't get that impression because it's talked about so much. It was the most popular theater because it was Shakespeare's theater, but there were other theaters, some of which were public and some of which were private. So the private theaters were more expensive, they were smaller, and they were completely enclosed, meaning there was a roof over the whole building. And the private theaters had lighting, so they could offer shows at night. The public theaters were cheap. Remember, the groundlings could pay a penny to stand and see the play. The public theaters were larger. The Globe had a capacity of 3,000. The public theaters were open air. Not completely. There were some sections that were covered by a roof, but there was a center section that was open air. And the public theaters offered no lighting, so plays were restricted to during the day. Usually the plays were performed from about 2 to 4 in the afternoon. So the Globe was located on what people would call the bad side or the sketchy side of the Thames River. So Thames is spelled Thames, so it looks like Thames, but it's pronounced Thames. And if you can see on the map, don't pay attention to the red buildings. This map was actually showing something else when I pulled it from the internet, but pay attention to the building with the flag flying. That is the Globe Theater, and you can see that it is along the Thames. And because it was on the sketchy side, a lot of nobles would wear masks when they attended plays so that people could not recognize them. So again, don't get the impression that the Globe was the only theater. This map shows a number of the theaters that were active during Shakespeare's time. So you can see the Globe there on the banks of the Thames, but you can also see lots of other theaters. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the location of the theater. Some of the other public theaters that you can find on the map are the Swan, the Fortune, the Red Bull, the Bear Garden, the Bull Ring, and the Hope. Some of the private theaters that are on the map are St. Paul's, Blackfriars. You might be able to locate the Cockpit, Salisbury Court, Grey Inn's Theater, Middle Temple Inn Theater, Whitehall Theater, and Whitefriars. There are also on the map some of the inns where theater companies would perform their plays. There's the Bull Inn, the White Hart, and the George Inn. So I thought this might be of interest to you to note that there were lots of other theaters, not just the Globe. So the original Globe Theater was built with a thatched roof. And I put this picture up again because I want you to notice how much roof there was. Thatch looks like this, and as you can see, is very flammable. So the roof of the original Globe Theater caught on fire when a cannon went off as part of the show during a performance of Henry VIII, and the theater burned to the ground. So the Elizabethan theater did not have backdrops or fixed scenery, but they did use props, and they used real props. This was no fake cannon. This was an actual cannon that went off during the play. So sadly, the original Globe burned to the ground. It was rebuilt, this time with a tiled roof, but this Globe Theater was taken down in 1644 because of Puritan forces and laws that found the theater a bad influence on people. So if you know your English history, this was the time of Oliver Cromwell, who was a devout Puritan. Never fear, the Globe was rebuilt. 1997, this modern day Globe was built on the site of the original Globe, the one that had the thatched roof. So let's go inside the theater. So the name, the Globe, comes from three sources. One, the theater is round. Two, the theater's motto is "The whole world is a playhouse." And this motto was inscribed in Latin over the main door of the original playhouse. Shakespeare reworked this motto into his play As You Like It, and there's a line in the play that says, "All the world's a stage." So he took that motto, reworked it a little bit, and put it into one of his plays. A third source for the name the Globe is that when first built, a flag with Hercules carrying a globe on his shoulders was flown over the playhouse. Flags were routinely flown to advertise the current play. So if you remember in that picture of the Globe, I had you note the flag. So when the Globe was first opened, there was that flag of Hercules carrying the globe on his shoulders. But then flags were used routinely to advertise the play that was being performed. Kind of an Elizabethan marquee. So if you know what a modern day marquee looks like, you can imagine that the flag served as the Elizabethan marquee. So let's look at some of the interior of the Globe Theater. You can see that it's 3 stories high. Seating was on 3 sides of the stage except in the back. This required actors to move constantly and face many directions. So this is very different from today, where we avoid the seats on the side because they cut off part of the stage. Usually those seats are cheaper in price because you can't have a full view of the stage, but as you can see from this picture, that's not the case. But the actors do have to accommodate, so they're not performing just to the people in front of them, they're performing to the people on the sides as well, so they're constantly moving to accommodate 3 sides of an audience. So directly in front of the 5-foot-high stage was an open-air yard or pit where the groundlings stood to watch the play. The groundlings paid the cheapest price. They paid a penny. So they did have to stand the whole time, but the stage was only 5 feet high, so if you were lucky enough to be in the front, you could lean your elbows on the stage, and it was actually quite comfortable. You had really a great view if you didn't mind standing. So just beyond the open yard, there was a gallery or bench seating. This section was covered with a roof. So the good thing is that you wouldn't get wet if it started to rain. But in Shakespeare's time, the bench seating was not tiered. Now you see that it's tiered in the modern Globe, the one that was built in 1997, but it was not tiered in Shakespeare's time, so there would be a problem with view. You might not be able to see over the head of the person in front of you since the benches are not tiered. But you did have the advantage of a roof, but you did pay a little bit more to get in to see the show. There is a roof over the stage itself, held up by those 2 large pillars. The balcony above the stage was used in the play or used for musicians or for more seating. There were 2 side balconies for those guests who wished to be seen. Behind the stage were the dressing rooms, and they were called the tiring house. There was a center curtain with a small room behind for surprise revelations during plays. So if you look at the picture, you see the actor in either the orange or red pants. Right behind him is this curtained area. Now, in this Globe Theater, the company has built doors, but in Shakespeare's time, there would have been a curtain. And in the play Hamlet, Polonius, this old man character, is hiding behind the curtain so that he can overhear what happens in the room, but he is stabbed through the curtain. So that curtained area was definitely used during the play. And then if you'll notice to the right and left of that center area, there are entrance and exit doors. So what was it like to see a play during Shakespeare's time? Well, it was very crowded. So this is the first bullet point under section 5. Remember I told you that the Globe had a seating capacity of 3,000. There were no fire codes. So people were shoulder to shoulder packed in, especially if it was a popular play. The modern day Globe's seating capacity is only 1,500. Outside the theater was like market day. The theater grounds were filled with people, vendors, stalls. Sellers were offering food and merchandise. Lots of young people would attend the theater. Employers would actually complain that their apprentices, which would be kids about your age, would sneak off to the theater. So it was a very festive occasion, and a lot of times these vendors would come inside to sell their wares. And you can see in the picture, the lady with the yellow scarf around her head is holding up an apple. Highly likely she's a vendor trying to sell her apples. But one thing to note is that the audience would participate in the play. Someone might buy that apple and actually throw it at the actors if they didn't like what they heard or saw. So people would shout, boo, hiss, throw nutshells and fruit at the actors they did not like. The groundlings especially would participate because they were standing right in front of the stage, often leaning their elbows on the stage. And in the picture, you can see that the play being performed is A Midsummer Night's Dream. You also had to watch out for pickpockets because there were plenty of vendors, but there were plenty of pickpockets as well, so you had to guard your purse. The story is told that some of the nuts that the vendors would sell, the groundlings would eat the nuts and throw the shells on the floor, and over time those shells were pounded into the ground, creating a floor instead of dirt. So because of the crowds, Elizabethans went to hear a play, not necessarily to see a play. So there was the issue with the number of people, but then also the large Elizabethan headdresses would block the view. And you can see in the picture that high collars were kind of an in thing, and certainly a high collar or a tall hat would block your view. So going to hear a play made a little bit more sense than going to see a play. And also remember, there wasn't tiered seating, and if you're a groundling and you're not at the front of the stage, then you might be standing behind someone who's really tall. The actors played multiple roles. The female parts were played by young men, probably teenagers, before their voices changed or before they had a lot of beard. So here's a modern day company who has tried to emulate that original practice of male actors playing the female roles. One last picture. It seems really odd to us, but women did not act back in Shakespeare's time. That would be considered very disreputable. So we have backdrops, scenery, and very high-tech lighting these days, but in Shakespeare's time there were no backdrops or fixed scenery, but actors did use props and furniture and costumes. So think about, we use backdrops, scenery, lighting to indicate location and time change. But what did they do back in Shakespeare's time? Well, they used costumes. They also used their language, what they said, to indicate a location or time change. And then they might carry a prop, such as a lantern, to indicate nighttime. There's a scene in Romeo and Juliet where the actors come out on stage and they're all wearing their nightgowns. And that indicates to us that it is night. Because remember, these plays were performed during the day. It was that open air theater, so it was daylight. So you had to indicate nighttime somehow. So costumes, language, and props would help do so, since you did not have lighting, backdrops, or scenery. Music was very much a part of the play, music and song. And some of the music sounded like this. I'm sure you can buy a CD of Elizabethan music if you're interested. So plays were often performed before publication. Copyright laws did not exist, so often rival theater groups would attend plays and make what were called foul scripts to perform the play later. Actors usually did not get lines until right before the play was to be performed for audiences. Therefore, there was little time to memorize lines. Actors relied on a cue person backstage to whisper the line right before speaking it. So you can imagine that that method made plays take longer or even messed up the rhythm of the play. There would be maybe some awkward pauses here and there. We still use cue people today. Here's a guy holding up a cue card for a host of a television program. All right, so what about the politics? How did politics play into theater? Well, the theater was strictly controlled by the monarch's censorship committee. There was a danger that with so many people gathered in one place, large numbers of people could be influenced against the monarch. So I don't know if you remember in A Midsummer Night's Dream, but the tradesmen have to perform their play in front of a character named Philostrate, who is the master of revels for Duke Theseus. So he has to watch the play, approve the play, and then he's the one who decides whether it goes on the list of choices Duke Theseus has for entertainment after his wedding. Also, you'll notice in Shakespeare's plays there are often compliments to the current monarch. So Shakespeare would deliberately put in lines that complimented the monarch in hopes that that would help get his play approved. So scripts were submitted, you need to know this term, to the master of revels for approval. All right, and we're going to stop there and pick up with sources for Romeo and Juliet on the next video.